I was born in 1959. The 50s, technically. So my formative years, for me, I think anyway, would have been the 70s. The 70s is when I was a teenager. The 70s is when I went to high school. The 70s is when I probably became a fan of whatever it is I'm a fan of, and one of those things was film. I mentioned in previous podcasts that one of the two things that my grandmother would let me do when I was living with her was go to the movies and go to the library. So I was extremely well read and watched a shit ton of movies in the 70s, which, according to some, is arguably one of the best decades in film ever. So we're going to geek out tonight on Whiskey Business. I'm your host, Dino Tripodis, along with my producer, Greg Hansberry, and our producer of our YouTube channel, which you're watching, John Whitney, as well.
Hello, Dino.
Our guest bottle tonight is Pikesville 110 proof straight rye whiskey from the good folks at Heaven Hill, something that they've had for a while and decided to go wide with it here in recent years. I will mention this, and Hansberry, you can back me up. When we used to work together back in the day, when we used to work together at the radio station, what'd I say? Rye whiskey was on the rise.
You did say that.
I did say that. How many years ago did I say that?
Three? Probably more. That's the last time, or the first time I remember you saying it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
probably. But what you tell me? 10 years ago?
No. It was right around 5. My point being that since 2009, purchase and consumption of rye whiskey is up 609%.
Does it have to do with the craft bourbon boom altogether, you think, or not necessarily?
I think it's the fact that people who love whiskey have discovered the virtues of rye whiskey, straight rye whiskey, and we'll talk more about Pikesville Straight Rye Whiskey a little bit later on after our guest gets to sip it a little bit. Tim Feran is back with us. For those of you who are longtime listeners of the podcast, Tim Feran was on with us when we talked about the new golden age of television.
Peak TV.
Yes, and while we were in the midst of that conversation, we started to slide into movies, and we started rattling off some of our favorite films, and a lot of those were in the 70s. And I said, you have to come back,
right, and
we have to discuss
absolutely
the greatest films of the 70s, and why, again, that decade is arguably one of the best decades in film history. Now, I'm sure we're going to hear from you. I'm sure we're going to hear from my buddy, director John Whitney, because he's a huge 70s fan. And Hansberry is just a huge movie buff, so tonight could be an education for you. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you won't be shy when you pick up the microphone.
I'm going to defend the 90s.
You're going to defend the 90s? Okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that. As we discuss the 70s, you're a big fan of the 70s.
So we're going to subtitle this episode of Whiskey Business, That 70s Show.
That 70s Show. Yeah, we could do that. We could do that.
Very good.
We could do that.
Well, and like you, I am of a certain age. Actually, I'm older.
I know. I hate the fact you're one of the few guests that is actually older than me and looks younger. I don't know what pact you made with
my pact with the devil.
With the devil, but
you're holding up very good, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
As Dick Clark once told me, Tim, people ask me how I look so young, and I tell them, choose your parents wisely. And
funny.
That is it. My father, God rest his soul, died at 90. But at age 80, he was still being carded for his senior discount.
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding you.
That is one fine bloodline, my friend.
That is an epic bloodline, pal.
And, of course, clean living.
Well, reasonably, yeah, you know. So
said your host as he lit up another cigarette.
As we look at whiskey that's aged at least 6 years, according to the label. Yes. So but going back to our 70s show theme, yes. So I came of age around that time too, and just sort of blithely assumed that, man, this was how it usually is with all of these great movies. And now, looking back, I realize, holy cow, that was unbelievable. And then in preparation for the show, I just sort of, idly typed into my computer search screen, best films in 1970 through 1980. And rather than popping up just some random stuff, about half a dozen things right at the top of the search were best decade in film history.
Right.
And there were several things where people said, people talk about 1939 being like one of this great years for films, but holy cow.
Well, there was the golden age of Hollywood.
Right.
And they say that the 70s was new Hollywood at that particular time.
That's right. New Hollywood and the film brats.
Right.
As they call
the film
them
brats,
at the time, which they're now old geezers.
I know, but they were quite the talented brats. We're talking.
Yeah, I mean,
Francis Ford Coppola.
He was the elder statesman of the gang, and Spielberg and Scorsese and Lucas.
They're all the film school guys that ended up breaking the
exactly.
system and then
This
doing
was
their own thing.
This was the first generation that was almost entirely film school educated.
Film school educated and influenced by French films as well.
Well, by international films.
Right.
I mean, not just
the French film, but that wave of French.
The neorealism.
The neorealism area.
French New Wave.
Yeah, the
everything.
French New Wave.
Those
definitely had
a
their,
lot of Asian stuff.
They definitely had their influence.
Yeah.
On what they were seeing and then wanting to do with films
exactly.
at that particular point in time.
Which is not to diminish, of course, their knowledge of the history in Hollywood films, too. I mean, so many times looking back in some of the films from the 70s by these guys, and you'll see homage to a John Ford movie, a Howard Hawks movie, something like that. And it's like, this could not be any more obvious now looking at them.
Yeah, so. You mentioned Coppola right out of the gate. I forget that he wrote Patton. He wrote Patton. And then after he wrote Patton, he was commissioned to...
That's how he launched.
To do the Godfather. Which anybody that knows the history of the making of that film, it was just one struggle after another.
Hugely fraught.
Just incredibly. And the fact that he did that one in 72 and then came back in 74 and made what some people think is an even better film than The Godfather, because that's another battle and another podcast which we plan on having about the going knee deep into The Godfather. But the fact that he made those two films in that span of time is just incredible.
Yeah. I mean, so many films seminal to not just films in the decades from then until now, but also a lot of things that have led to, coming full circle here, to some of the peak TV. I mean, come on, The Sopranos wouldn't exist had The Godfather not been made.
I tend to agree with that.
You cannot conceive of it.
Let me apologize. I introduced you as being on our podcast before, but Tim Feran works with the Columbus Dispatch. He's a writer for the Columbus Dispatch. For the longest time, you worked in the media portion of the newspaper. You did movie reviews and you did articles on exactly what we're talking about.
I covered television and film and theater.
So you know from what you speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're still writing for the Columbus Dispatch and doing a hell of a job.
Thank you.
And I'm thrilled that you're here tonight talking about something that we both love collectively, and I'm sure a lot of you people who are film geeks, lovers of film, can appreciate the fact that the 70s, it's interesting when somebody watches somebody like your age, Hansberry, goes back and watches a film from the 70s and then is like blown away.
Well, I was born in '84, so I mean that puts me into late 90s, early 2000s before I could even understand some of these movies. So yeah, you're talking 30 years later.
Yeah, and you appreciate them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't have appreciated them if I watched them when I was 10. I would have not what to know what to do with about it.
But that's the thing. That's the thing. All right, 72. How old am I in 1972? I was born in 59. 69. I'm what? 12?
13.
12, 13 years of age. I stumbled across this book that my uncle read cover to cover in one night. And I was like, what's he reading that he can't stop reading it? And it was The Godfather.
Right.
And it said, soon to be a major motion picture
Right.
from Paramount.
Right.
And then I grabbed that book and I read it. And I went right through it. And I was, and I said, Uncle Chris, when this movie comes out, you got to take me. Because I wouldn't have been of age to see it
Right.
at that particular time.
Right.
So I beg to differ, my young friend. At 12 or 13 years of age, when my uncle took me with him to see that movie, I was just mesmerized.
I mean, no matter what age or what level of education, genius is genius, and you can usually discern it.
And
I mean, even if you don't know anything about baseball, if you see, Willie Mays in his
Right.
prime, that guy, he must be really good.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I have an entirely different appreciation for those films now, things that I
Sure.
am aware of now as an adult that I was not aware of.
You can critically watch it, and absolutely.
And see things that I never saw before. But man, just watching that unfold, and then also. Okay, they left that out. That's not. They didn't put that part from the book. They didn't put that part from the book. And I'm watching it that way, even at 13 years of age. I'm like, how come they didn't do more about Luca Brasi? And my uncle's like, shut the fuck up and watch the movie.
Just to finish on that thought I think that's why I do appreciate this era, this decade so much, because I could, when I was in college, sit down and watch all three Godfathers in a row, and I had a better I was old enough to get what was going on. So, you're one of a kind, Dino. Not all of us are reading through The Godfather at 13,
Well, that's all I was allowed. That's all I was allowed to do was read books and go to movies. That was it. My grandmother, I've mentioned it on previous podcasts, was quite the disciplinarian, and my mother wasn't there, and she said, on my watch, nothing's gonna happen. I'm not gonna let anything happen to you on my watch. So you can go to the library, you can go to the movies. How much trouble can you get going there?
There was a branch library in a shopping strip on my walk home from grade school, St. Clair in Lyndhurst, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And so I would visit that every night, too, like you. And then my parents would let me go to the
And you're a very well-read individual as well.
So, I hear you, man.
We've had talks about not only film, we've had talks about literature and film and booze. And
you're one of the few people I know who had a subscription, as do I, to New York Review of Books.
Yeah.
So
I just got the latest one as we
speak.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Enough of our.
But the Mutual Admiration Society, we continue on film.
Let's go on film.
But
I asked you guys wanted a room.
Right. Yeah. Right. Get a room, you two.
God, this is a tough question.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but neither of us are LGBT. Sorry, folks.
I hate this question.
Yes.
When people ask me, "What's your favorite movie?" don't ask, because the best I can do is maybe give you a favorite film from every decade, and even that's difficult, because if I had to pick a favorite movie from the 70s, I would probably lean towards Godfather 1 and 2.
And then there are...
But then there's so many.
Yes.
Take it out of the equation, Dino. We know that it's your favorite.
All right, it's
so
out of
there's
the
not
equation. So then
a favorite, but, you can name a bunch of favorites or favorites in a certain genre.
Yeah.
I mean, and in the 70s... I mean, gee whiz. I mean, we're talking. This was the decade.
This was the decade.
We started off the decade with MASH.
Okay. Robert Altman. A whole different kind of movie.
Last
for its
Picture
time.
Show, 71. French Connection, 71. Harold and Maude.
Became a cult classic.
Godfathers 1 and 2, 72 and 74. I mean, what a way to start the decade. And then it kept on going. Yeah.
Cuckoo's
Mean
Nest.
Streets,
Okay, Scorsese.
Exorcist, 73. Chinatown, one of my all-time faves, 74. Dog Day Afternoon, 75. 1979 was kind of a peak year. There were a bunch of films that came out that were really great, but also it signified a turning point in the 70s, because while it continued the kind of movies that we're kind of talking about that were adult and very stimulating intellectually and well done and well crafted, 1975 also happened to be the year when the first new blockbuster, Jaws, came.
Jaws, that which kind of
which changed everything.
Defined the term blockbuster in its own way.
In the new Hollywood.
Yeah, in New Hollywood for sure.
And, then afterward, even though Nashville was 75 and
Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, and, All the President's Men, 76. Taxi Driver, 76. Annie Hall, 77. But also
Academy
77, the next blockbuster, Star Wars.
The movie that the studios didn't think would do well.
Right.
Right? I thought it would kind of just pop out and go away. And also, Lucas had issues with that in the making of that film.
The one where George Lucas showed it to Coppola, and Coppola said, "I'm really sorry about your luck."
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a rough cut before all the effects. He showed it to him, and
Oops.
he just went, "Okay."
That's right. That's right.
That was probably the next time I was actually. I mean, Jaws scared the shit out of me when I first saw it in the theaters, but I think probably Star Wars was the next time I probably sat in a movie theater in awe of what was coming at me in as far as a film and what was going on as far as escapism and the worlds that they took me to.
I really anticipated that it was going to be big. From when I had read about it in Variety, and it was like
in 1977, you read about it in Variety.
Yeah.
How old were you in 1977? I was still in high school.
I was in college.
Oh well, excuse me.
And so I'm reading about it, and I'm thinking, okay, he's going to use kind of the same effects that Kubrick used in 2001. But he's going to apply it to, it sounds like a sort of Flash Gordon Buck Rogers thing. Ooh, this could work. This really sounds interesting and maybe a lot of fun. Let's just see. So I read a lot about how people say, nobody anticipated it could work. And I thought, well, some of us kind of did. I remember sitting in a class I was taking just as a kind of goof, a film class in college, and we were talking about it, and several of us said, that sounds like a really interesting thing, especially coming from this guy who did a really good job with American Graffiti, George Lucas.
Right.
And we thought, well, it's kind of it sounds like it could be a really cool pop culture sort of thing. So, let's give it a chance and see what happens. So, yeah, boom.
Yeah, boom.
I was in like 7th and 8th grade, and we were foaming at the mouth.
Absolutely.
And we could not wait for that movie.
You were waiting for it to come out? I mean,
God.
You're excited about it?
Oh, yeah. And that summer, I probably saw that movie, at least 20 times, because it was a really hot summer. And it was the first summer that my parents trusted me to go to the mall by myself or with my friends.
Yep.
We got dropped off. Matinees were like 75 cents. Wow. You want to go see Star Wars? Okay. So we went to go see Star Wars. That's what we did that summer.
I remember my freshman year at Ohio State University.
Yeah.
I lived in Taylor Tower on North Campus, and there was a movie theater on North High Street, University Flick. And for a solid year, I'm not kidding, the marquee didn't change. They had two theaters. One was showing Star Wars, and one was showing Rocky. Those were the two films that played my entire freshman year. Yeah. They did not change. And people would go to see Star Wars and Rocky on a regular basis, because Rocky came out in 76.
Right.
And that was probably, if I had to pick a film that was one of the most inspirational movies for me, it would have been Rocky. As far as having an effect on me, like I lost count of how many guys started drinking, eggs and getting up in the morning and starting to run, thinking they were going to be. But I just remember people getting up and giving the movie a standing ovation. I mean, how often do you see that anymore, where people stand up in the theater and applaud?
We need to bring that back. The applause at the end of movies, no
I
matter what movie it
people
is.
Standing up and clapping for Rocky. By the same token, I also saw him standing up for Billy Jack.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Maybe the '70s was a decade where we stood up pretty easily. If we liked something.
Well, if you go to the symphony and some other performances, that's been kind of a thing that when we had full-time critics at the Dispatch, we would discuss about how we're so easy, man. Well, people in all over, but in Columbus too, we get up and give a standing O to basically any performance.
Okay, but let me dig into the culture for just a second. In respects to the '70s, in the films of the '70s.
Yeah.
I mean, the '70s were a gritty time for America. It was not the best of times.
Well, we're talking
for our culture.
Vietnam was drawing to a conclusion, and Watergate,
gas shortages.
Absolutely.
The country was not in the best of shapes.
No.
So, do you think when I mention these standing ovations that people would sometimes stand up for in certain theaters, do you think it was because the films of the '70s offered enough escapism for us to say, Jesus, something good, something cool, something we can connect with, something that gives us hope.
Would that be films of after '75? Because the ones before '75 weren't really that
right.
uplifting.
Those were very dark.
They were dark films. There was a lot of anti-heroes in the '70s.
Yes,
there
were
that we became very close with.
I mean, come on, Network. Dog Day Afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, gee whiz.
Anti-establishment film.
Yeah, we connected with the anti-hero in a big way in the '70s.
Absolutely. But things turned, Things like
as they always do.
Star Wars and so forth. I mean, you had, '76 was sort of the tail end of the negative stuff with Network.
Mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Go. But '77 was Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah.
'78 was Superman, which, oh, by the way, wasn't that kind of the icebreaker for all of the frickin' superhero movies?
Sure. Well,
I mean, the
the
effects were crude.
Yeah, interesting.
But the whole idea that you could make a major motion picture about a comic book character and it would succeed hugely.
But it kind of at that particular point though, didn't it kind of start and stall with Superman? I mean, we went and saw the sequels to Superman, but I remember other superhero movies that followed Superman that didn't fare nearly as well.
Right.
It was like in the '80s, the Batman stuff with
even later.
Michael Keaton.
Yeah, that was later.
Yeah, but that was later on. Yeah, which. The Superman movies that failed toward the end. Oh boy,
should have.
They should have.
They were not good.
I think it was an example of having a hit, and all of a sudden they're like going,
what do we do next?
How do we make this kind of movie?
Right.
It's not like Marvel Universe now, where they know exactly how to do it.
They know the recipe.
Back in the '70s, they didn't know what the hell to do.
But the Salkinds, the producers of Superman. They didn't really have a clue what they had, and they didn't really know what they were doing.
You mentioned that right around '75 we started to turn, but there were two movies in 1976 that definitely reflected the nation. All the President's Men was in 1976, and one of my favorite films, which I still find riveting to this day, The Deer Hunter.
Absolutely.
Michael Cimino.
Absolutely.
And that was in '76.
Yes.
Yeah,
the late Michael Cimino, who died.
Yeah. Now, how that wasn't all that
within the last couple of years.
A couple of years. Another one of those, great filmmakers that made this amazing film, and then He's also attached to one of the biggest flops in
Although
history.
there's been some sort of
Heaven's Gate.
yeah. There's been some reconsideration of
About
Heaven's
it.
Gate,
Of course there is.
especially.
They always go back and find. Well, there was the reconsideration that people hated The Shining when it came out.
I didn't.
I know.
I thought it was a great film when it came out.
But it was
and said so.
drubbed.
I was reviewing at that point and said in my review, volumes are going to be written about this film because it is a great piece of work, and I knew that
But it
people
was
who
drubbed.
were fans of the book were going to say, well, this wasn't in the book, and this was
Right.
And I said, I don't care. It's it's a different medium, a different thing, and so come on, it's
And
a
hands
great
down
piece.
is my favorite horror film of all time. Hands
Shining.
down, The Shining.
Kubrick didn't like it, right? Or Stephen King
Stephen
didn't care
King
for
didn't
it.
like it, and a lot of people I did run into said they didn't like it either, and they said, why shouldn't it have been like kind of some crappy
Right.
scare fest? And I said, go see it, and if you aren't having nightmares about it in a few days, let me know. And they did, because guess what? Kubrick, when he was making the film, this, he had, was it Freud's interpretation of dreams or someone else?
It's Freud.
Yeah,
Freud's.
Freud's, yeah.
It's Freud's.
Yeah,
Freud
but
who
I-
has the book interpretation of
But
dreams.
he had some kind of that and maybe something else about dreams and was using dream imagery all throughout. It was something that for years and years, decades, that filmmakers have tried to do, a filmed dream, a filmed nightmare. And, when you watch that at like the 24-hour horror marathon at the Drexel in the middle of the night, and you're kind of lapsing in and out of sleep and watching something like that, it really is a filmed nightmare. It's unbelievable.
I'm not
Just extraordinary.
arguing that at all. I love The Shining, but the one that creeped me out the most in the 70s was definitely The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Absolutely.
as far as actually, I'm a little scared.
And again,
when you bring
there's
Catholicism,
there's
in,
another seminal work
Yeah.
that has pushed many other films in the decades since. I mean, so many groundbreaking works like The Exorcist, which came out and was like, whoa.
Yeah. That was
that I think that touched a lot of people because a lot of religious people out there that believe in that stuff,
in
Right.
possession.
Right.
Yeah.
and it really touched home with a lot of people.
I'm not so sure that I don't still today.
Right. So
believe that and I'm not even a good.
And by the
Catholic.
way, may I say, Linda Blair is a very sweet person. I've talked to her on a few occasions, and very nice gal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she never got past The Exorcist, though, did she? Really, as far as a career.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of.
Well, but there was Roller Boogie.
I think I made my point. yeah. All right.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on a film that was released almost the same moment as Star Wars, William Friedkin's Sorcerer.
A great film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think it got shortchanged that
I
year?
do. Absolutely. I mean,
Bad timing.
yeah, I think so. I think people were expecting, The Exorcist
Yeah,
2,
two.
basically, especially when they heard the title.
wasn't a good
and
movie.
It's like, no, this is a different movie entirely from what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But boy, yeah, talk about a movie that just did not get the attention and the honor that it really deserved.
Yeah. Why is that one of your favorite movies, Johnny?
I think the imagery. I think one of the. I was like 77, right? So I was 14, whatever, and I was at the Salem Drive-In Theater, and we saw the trailer for it, and they showed the sequence on the bridge with the bridge swaying back and forth. And I was like, "I've got to see this fucking movie." And when I saw it finally, I thought it was so intense, and just the sequence of them trying to drive that case of dynamite over these hills as they're almost falling off the side of these mountains is just like. And Roy Scheider is just awesome.
He is.
I mean, come on, Roy Scheider, come on.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just a great film. Just the mood, I like the pacing. It's kind of deliberate, and it's like I like it.
Scheider was probably one of those actors that I don't think ever really completely got his due.
Talk about somebody who never really got his due.
You talk about him in Jaws and Sorcerer and all that jazz where he was Fosse, and it was just that guy. He
was kind of hysterical, but at the same time it was like it was spot on.
Yeah,
because Bob Fosse was kind of hysterical.
Yeah, he was
in a kind of weird way.
But you're right. I remember him in the 7 Ups. I remember him in that movie.
Yes.
Yeah. Another gritty, cop movie. Good stuff.
Let me mention also, among the many other things that kind of seminal films that we continue to see the echoes of, Enter the Dragon.
Bruce Lee.
Martial arts, Bruce Lee, all that stuff, the Kung Fu movies.
I probably have seen Enter the Dragon more than anybody in this room because
I've seen it a bunch of times, but I bow to you.
Only because I was changing the marquee at the Grand Theater at that particular time in Steubenville, Ohio, and so I had free access to the movies, and I remember,
I'll buy that.
And
that was your Star Wars.
That was my Star Wars. I probably watched, and I watch it now. If it pops up on cable now, I watch it and just am amazed. And then to actually have worked with John Saxon, who was in the movie as well. That was I actually worked with him on our little independent movie way back in the bottom feeders.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, that's right. John Saxon played John Saxon.
Dino.
Yeah.
As cool as I always thought you are.
Let me stop
you.
Holy
cow.
Let me stop you.
You are now 1 degree of separation from John Saxon.
Let me stop you. I was in the same movie.
We are not worthy.
I was in the same movie as John Saxon, but we had no scenes together, which bummed the shit out of me. No scenes together in the film, and he was a very, he was kind, he was polite, but he was very quiet and short,
It's all right.
When you try to make small talk with him.
In stature, or
no. In his
which may be another whiskey business.
His dialogue
many
exchange.
Hollywood people. Yeah.
He wouldn't engage you in a lot of conversation. In between takes.
Yeah.
He would just he would do his thing and he'd wait. But he was the gangster in that movie that was sending a hitman out to get me. And but we never got to work together. So. But John Saxon. John Saxon.
Come on.
And Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee.
Yes.
So, yeah, I love that. I love that movie.
That's really sweet, man.
Also, one of the biggest anti-heroes of the 70s, Dirty Harry, came out in 1971.
2 films in the 70s.
Yeah.
Dirty Harry, is that right?
Dirty Harry
and Magnum Force.
Magnum Force.
Yeah.
Yes.
Talk about anti-heroes.
Yes.
And there was a guy that just
and that's
cut out the middleman and dealt with the shit.
And that, and talk about something else, that seminal film that carried on echoes in so many other things afterward. Yeah. I mean, what a decade. Let's see here. What else? What have we missed?
Well, I was going to bring up, it's probably on your list. We haven't touched the comedies yet. Because we talked, we've got the Monty Pythons.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
And
Holy
also
Grail.
Mel Brooks.
Frankenstein.
Young Frankenstein. Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles. Come
on. How many times am I quoting in the newsroom? What in the wide world of sports is going on here?
Somebody's going to have to go back and get a shitload of dimes.
and I made a quick shout out to our LGBT folks.
Yes.
Guess what? 1975, the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, yeah. Talk about something that became a cult favorite.
A cult favorite.
Even today, there's still screenings.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the midnight screenings
something
of
that
that
is passed
persist.
on from generation to generation.
That's right.
That's an amazing.
And in 1978, when we're talking about film comedy, in my estimation, one of the greatest film comedies of all time.
Which is celebrating an anniversary?
Animal House.
Animal House, 40th anniversary.
Son. Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life.
I think I had the exact same grade point average as Blutarsky.
8 years of college down the drain.
Down the drain.
Are you talking about Senator Blutarsky?
Senator Blutarsky. I was reading an article about how and I got pissed off when I read the article. How Animal House is in the archives as one of those
absolutely
seminal films
absolutely
in the archives of film history, but how it's not an appropriate film in today's Me Too generation, because of a lot of all this sexual situations.
Did you say it wouldn't get made today? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying they wouldn't get made today. There's a lot of films that probably wouldn't get made today of that nature that would not be accepted. Animal House, the exploitation of women in Animal House.
There were some exploitation of women scenes in, for instance, MASH, too.
Of course, yeah.
Blazing Saddles absolutely would not be made, I don't think.
Well,
for a lot of reasons.
Nobody moves or you know who gets it, yes. So, yes. Animal House, one more thing.
I loved Animal House.
Little Ohio connection, of course. One of the writers of that, Doug Kenny, of the Cleveland exurb suburb Chagrin Falls.
That's a guy who passed away too soon.
Yeah.
He passed away shortly after Caddyshack, didn't he?
That's right.
Yeah,
he was vacationing in Hawaii and fell or jumped, nobody really knows, off a cliff there. So
Great Netflix documentary about the whole Lampoon scene, and a movie directed by comedian David Wayne, about his life with somebody from SNL, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Will Forte plays Kenny. Great.
Yes.
It's on Netflix.
I saw a screener of that at the Nantucket Film Festival a few years ago, and again, you're talking about like Me Too and the different era. Mm-hmm. Somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked the director, producer about, well, gee, the Lampoon, where were the women? Why weren't there women on the staff? And I just had to say, it's like, because Doug and Henry Beard, who was also, they were kind of leading lights at the Harvard Lampoon and then started the National Lampoon. At that time, Harvard wasn't co-ed, and neither was the Harvard Lampoon.
Interesting.
And the first woman to be admitted to the Harvard Lampoon staff was in like 1972.
I'll have to take your word for it. I don't know.
I think so. And so I believe it was
you
Patty
can fact
Marks,
check us if you'd like, ladies and gentlemen.
Who is today a very fine New York-based writer of, stuff in the New Yorker and various other publications. But, those were very, very different times. Those guys were scraping to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why they had a lot of really sexist stuff, both in the movie and in the magazine, was they weren't making it doing the same things that they had done in college. And so Matty Simmons, the publisher, man behind Diners Club credit cards, he was the bankroller of the magazine. He said, well, you got to put some naked girls in there. And so you'll see a definite turning point in that magazine where there's young women with bare breasts.
Weren't some of those women, though, some of the writers on the staff? There were writers on the staff of the National Lampoon at some point, wasn't there?
At some point later on. But I don't believe they were writers. Okay. They
were staff. Some of them were staff.
Yeah, but they hired like models, and yeah, it was just one of those things where it was like they were desperate, and they were trying to make it. Yeah.
We'll do it.
But anyway,
we'll do whatever we have to do.
Yeah.
And it was the 70s.
Yes, it was.
That was a crazy time on television, which we discussed
Right.
before, and also in film. Who do you think was the man in the 70s? If you had to pick one actor who probably prospered the most in the 70s and can consider the 70s films his benchmark decade, who might that be?
Clint
Eastwood?
I'd agree Clint Eastwood, yeah.
I would say Al Pacino.
Artistically, you might be right. Although, that was when
Godfather.
that was,
Godfather
of
2.
course,
Dog Day Afternoon.
that was, of course, when De Niro was launching.
I was going to say De Niro.
Yeah, De Niro was also, Mean Streets.
And by the way, I think it was in the 70s, there was a Time magazine cover with the two kind of iconic figures in film at the time, Clint Eastwood, and his back was to Burt Reynolds.
Oh, forgot about old Burt.
Because one
Forgot
of the
about old Burt.
one
I
of
love
the
Burt
other
Reynolds.
films of the
I
70s.
love Burt Reynolds.
Oh, by the way, Smokey and the Bandit,
I love
1977, and earlier in that decade,
Mr. Reynolds, I apologize.
Deliverance?
Yeah, Deliverance with Burt and John Voight.
when we thought
The Longest Yard,
Yeah.
also in the 70s. if I
Oh, my God.
Deliverance, when we thought, well, Burt Reynolds, for Christ's sake,
Yeah.
this guy is going to be like, he's got some chops here in Deliverance, and then he just sort of goes off. It was like Stallone. We thought initially, well, this guy is kind of the return of John Garfield, and then he goes off and does, Rambo, and just this sort of becomes this sort of
Rambo has its artistic merits, my friend.
But how does a guy who
as far
writes
as action movies go.
Rocky, the first draft, in like a weekend, become the kind of star he is today?
That's-
you know what I mean? That's
come
just
on.
so weird.
That's
Is that an argument right there?
that's not really. That's a kind of an apocryphal story that he has encouraged because
Okay, a fast turnaround. Let's change the.
because I read something later on.
I just
from
want to
one of the
compliment you on the word
producers.
apocryphal.
It's a lot of letters. It's a lot of points in Scrabble there, Tim.
Don't do this at home. I'm a professional. But yeah, one of the producers, I want to say, or no, it was one of the network studio folks said, look, he wrote a treatment over a weekend, and
Yeah, that's true.
then
I did hear that. Yes.
it was massaged heavily by a whole bunch of really good script doctors.
Yeah. And they also didn't want him originally to play Rocky either.
And they also didn't want him to play Rocky, and then they just sort of relented and said, like, well, if you keep it under this budget and so forth.
Which they did.
That's the only way they could have done it, because if they would have hired somebody else with more clout, they could not have made that film.
That's right. Exactly.
I'm glad they didn't. Guilty pleasure, all the Rocky movies except 5. But I love Rocky 1, 2, 3,
they are a
4.
hoot.
I hate Rocky 5.
They're a hoot.
I love The Return, Rocky
Balboa.
Balboa. I love that one. I love Stallone
Creed.
in Creed. Yes, in Creed.
In Creed.
And there's
Yeah.
another Creed coming out.
That was a great idea.
Yeah,
I liked
that was a
lot.
great. So,
Yeah.
and there were other films that Stallone was in that that I appreciated him.
Death Race 2000.
Not Death Race 2. Copland.
Right.
I liked him in Copland.
Right.
I
Although some of us saw the title and thought, what is Stallone doing in a movie about the composer Aaron Copland?
yeah. I'll and you can chastise me all you want. I'm probably one of the few people that liked Oscar. Yeah, spit take with Sylvester
Excuse me,
Stallone.
Have not seen it.
Had I some coffee, I would have done a Danny Thomas.
Yeah. Yes. I actually enjoyed Oscar. I found some comedic merit in Oscar.
Hey, speaking of comedies, we skipped over Slapshot.
Slapshot, one of your favorites.
I like that film.
Oh,
really funny movie.
okay, Coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gordie Howe,
and
real old-time
starring
hockey.
another Ohioan,
Paul Newman.
Paul Newman.
Yeah, Paul Newman.
Come on.
Of course. One of those movies that should not be remade, by the way.
No.
Never.
No.
Never.
No. That was perfection.
I saw that there's a remake of Papillon coming out.
Why?
Why?
No.
Why remake? Why?
No.
But you know it's
I know.
coming. It's
I know.
coming.
I know
And
it.
I don't know why they would do that. Why did they remake Ben-Hur? Why?
I mean,
why would anybody?
Steve McQueen is just awesome.
Now wait a minute. Ben-Hur was a remake of Ben-Hur.
Okay, all right, I'll give you that. But that was a silent film.
But yes, exactly.
That was a silent film.
And yes.
I don't know what that counts for, but that's my only argument. And it's a great silent film.
And by the way, same director, of course, Cecil B. DeMille.
Right.
And if you look at the chariot race scene, if you've ever seen the chariot race scene in the silent movie, it's kind of astonishing because they basically just reshot the same damn thing for the Heston version. I mean, it's really kind of jaw-dropping how similar it is.
We, you talk about remakes or reboots. Alien came out in '79,
Yep.
and there's been a lot of Alien sequels and reboots
and prequels.
I'm trying to think of movies that should not be remade.
Soylent Green from the 70s, one of my favorite sci-fi films in the 70s, Soylent Green.
Apocalypse Now from '79.
I was just going to say that. Apocalypse Now, you can't remake that.
You can't remake that. I wouldn't want to see it.
It is of its era, as is Deer Hunter. Partly filmed here in Ohio, by the way.
Oh, right down the street from me.
Right
Mingo
down the
Junction.
street in Mingo Junction,
Right
and
next to
some of it
Steubenville,
up
Ohio.
in my hometown, up in Cleveland, at Lemco Hall. That's the wedding scene. That was, which of course is now condos. They've converted that.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah,
That's
but
too bad.
there's so many places.
Let me take a little pause here before we start to wrap things up, and let's talk about the whiskey that we are more than halfway through. The Pikesville 110 proof,
Very good.
straight rye whiskey from Heaven Hill. They bought it in 1982. It's been around since the 19th century.
Since the 1890s, according to the information on the bottle.
A fixture in Maryland, and when Heaven Hill bought it, they kept making it for the folks who loved it in Maryland. But then they started to expand on it and brought it up a notch to 110 proof. And like I said, rye whiskey consumption has gone up 609% since 2009, and they've done a fine job with this one. It's about 6 years old, and I don't know. You guys have been drinking whiskey with me for a while now. Yeah. Have you picked up on any of the flavor?
Well, it's got a really sweet kind of aftertaste. Now that I'm sitting on it, it's very sweet. Not up front, but it's good.
I get a little black coffee in this one. Really? Yep, and a little caramel and
A little toffee.
Speaking of coffee, so my love and I, Mary Ellen, we have gotten into the habit on Sundays of having our brunch after Mass. We'll have coffee, French press, cream, and Jameson.
And Jameson's, a little Irish coffee.
And only Jameson really stands up to this really good, potent coffee, and I suspect this would do the same, because once we tried it, we were at a restaurant and they ran out of Jameson, and they said, well, we'll try the Tullamore,
Dew.
which is a blend.
Yes.
It just didn't stand up to the coffee.
We've had Tullamore Dew on.
It's
on
good.
the show. It's very good.
I won't complain about Tullamore as straight, but boy,
Next
this
time,
would do
if
just
this would
as
do,
well. I
or
think.
if you're looking for another Irish whiskey,
Yeah.
we've had Patty on the show as well.
Yeah.
Try some of that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
If you're and also the Jameson's Black Barrel. We've had that on the show too. So
Yeah.
You
Oh, yeah.
You're poised and ready to say something.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say he just gave us away his secret of youthful looks. Is on Sundays he drinks.
Well, no,
drinks
I think,
Irish whiskey.
Jamie and coffee.
Yeah, no. I think the key to that was he goes to mass. Yeah, he goes
There's
to
the mass part, right.
He
That's
goes
true.
to mass.
But
Yeah,
as Mary Ellen's son says, that doesn't really count. You guys go to the hippie church. It's a Catholic church, but it's St. Francis of Assisi in Victorian Village, and let's just say there's a lot of quite a spectrum.
if you're putting in the time on a Sunday to go and hear the word, whatever the word might be, it counts.
Okay, so
So,
Moving
in
on.
conclusion, God, I'm just looking at some of these films
I know it's
from the
crazy.
70s.
It's crazy.
Manhattan, Annie Hall, both great films from the now disgraced
We didn't
Woody
mention
Allen.
the Sting.
The Sting. Scorsese had not only The Taxi Driver, but Mean Streets, and
then danced into 1980 with Raging Bull.
Raging Bull.
Barry Lyndon. You didn't mention Barry Lyndon. I thought
Oh
it was
my
a great
God!
film.
Talk about spectacular film. Yeah.
And Kelly's Heroes. Come on, Kelly's Heroes, please.
One of my favorite. Now,
Give it to me.
That one.
Kelly's Heroes.
That one.
Is that a comedy?
That's a war comedy. Clint Eastwood, Don Rickles, Donald Sutherland. That's one. That's one. That's one that I think that actually, God help me, could be remade and remade pretty and done well. I think if somebody was at the helm, I think we'd have another Kelly's Heroes. We came close to it, I think, with Three Kings.
Yes.
Mark
That's
Wahlberg,
about as close to
Our man George.
Clooney.
as close to a Kelly's Heroes that you'll probably get.
Who,
in
by
film.
the way, I'm sorry, people try to say like, oh, kind of a Kentucky gentleman. Come on, George is an Ohio guy.
Yes, he's a Cincinnati boy,
boy.
right?
Well,
And he spent some time right here too, by the way.
Columbus.
Yes, he did.
There you go.
Doing what?
Well, his dad,
I know his dad.
my pal Nick, was working.
Oh, who's
here.
dropping names
Thank
now?
you.
Uh-huh.
Who's
And
dropping
Nina,
names now? Nick
and
Clooney.
Linda
Nina,
Blair,
Nina,
Clooney. Look at this
Nina
guy
was
over
a
here.
producer for Flippo.
Oh wow.
Yes.
Okay.
The clown.
Yeah. For those of you who are watching outside the Columbus, Ohio area, Flippo the Clown was a beloved local personality here in Columbus,
Bozo
Ohio.
or
Yeah, he
Fitz.
was awesome. He was great.
Fritz.
He was great.
No, I don't miss an opportunity to mention Nick and Nina because they're great people. I'm sorry.
No, why should you? I mean, I would mention them if I knew them.
Well,
And I hope someday maybe you'll introduce me to them.
We'll go down to Augusta, Kentucky, and hang out in their house, which is lovely, by the way.
Now, you mentioned a couple of directors from the 70s who are still
Scorsese.
making great films today as we speak. Martin Scorsese would be one of them. Steven Spielberg is still making great movies today.
Absolutely. Coppola is sort of, I don't know if he's semi-retired.
I think he's
would you say?
semi-retired. I would think he's semi-retired.
Yeah.
Has he done anything since Godfather 3? After that? Did he do anything after that?
He made a small independent film that was in black and white that he shot on HD back about 7 years ago with his.
That's right.
Something really small.
Yeah.
He spent $1 million.
And of course,
Of his own
Lucas, kind of continues to be, trying to live down those atrocious prequels.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the most successful independent filmmaker of all time. if you want to be technical about it. He paid for every one of those films.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, can't take that away from him. You know.
But, I mean, you're talking about people who, holy cow, we just had a success. Now what do we do? That was George Lucas after the first Star Wars. I mean, he brought in several other writers to help out on the next one, which turned out to be, in some estimation, different, maybe better in some ways than the first one.
What, Empire Strikes Back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
A lot of people who love Star Wars thinks that Empire is the best Star
Yes.
Wars since Rogue One, actually. But, Rogue One is probably the best of the contemporary ones.
Right.
What amuses me about your love for Star Wars is that you are, as an adult, still first in line on day one to see every new Star Wars incarnation.
Oh, I'm the only guy sitting there waiting for the movie to start 3 hours before it starts. Yes.
Yeah.
Me and some other dude behind me about 5 doors.
I think that's great, though. I think that's great. I think it's great that
We have a group of movie nerds at this table, don't we?
Absolutely. And I know many more nerds that are not at this table that hopefully will appreciate this conversation. I'm going to do a shout out to Mark Hoyk. Mark Hoyk in Los Angeles, California, who reviews films and writes about films. And
I know Mark.
And if he was here right now, which he promises me he's coming back to Ohio at some point, he's going to be sitting across
He better.
from me where you're at, and we're gonna get into even deeper into film.
Absolutely.
So Google Mark Hoyk. That's Heuck, and see all the stuff that he puts out online on the internet. It's a nice little list of things, far too long for me to mention right now, and I apologize, Hoyk, but Google Mark Hoyk. He gets the shout out.
He was the movie nerd in that television show on MTV a while back.
No, it was on Comedy
On
Central.
Comedy Central,
On
yeah.
Comedy Central. It was.
He worked for a time at the Drexel.
Yes. Correct,
He had
yeah.
long hair.
He still has long hair.
Yeah, he
Beautiful.
still
long-
does,
Actually,
yes.
he cut it and grew it back. He cut it and gave it
Oh,
to.
good for Mark.
He cut it for charity.
Yeah.
And then grew it back. Yeah. Hoyk is.
He's timeless. He doesn't change. He doesn't. He
No,
looks
no.
exactly
Yeah,
the way
he's
when
another
I knew him
one.
back in
He's,
the
Yeah.
he's, he's
Yeah.
another pack with Satan. So now, Hoyk, now that you've been talked about and exploited on this podcast, you have no choice but to be on it.
Mark.
So there
Hello.
you go. There you go. So
I
check
do
out
remember you.
Mark Hoyk
Very
and
fondly,
and appreciate
yes.
everything he does.
Yes.
Are we doing shout outs?
We're doing this. Yeah, we were supposed to do these in the beginning, and I glazed right over it because I was excited about our topic tonight. But we want to thank everybody who's been responding to the podcast. We ask you to rate and review on iTunes. We also have, as I mentioned, Greg Hansberry, our producer for the podcast, John Whitney, our producer for the YouTube channel, which we just recently started here in the last few weeks, and that's been going very well. Thank you, John. But we've gotten some nice shout-outs from people. We want to share a couple of them.
Totally cool.
On iTunes, thanks to I Am Runner 5-star rating. I went from belly chuckle laughs to touching moments in the same episode. Keep up the great work.
I don't know
Maybe
what
not
episode-
so much this one.
I don't know what episode that was, but okay.
But thank you. We encourage you to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you subscribe to the show because it kind of bumps us up and gives us some clout and it exposes us to other
Yeah,
listeners.
absolutely.
We appreciate it. You can find us on Instagram at Whiskey Business Podcast, on Facebook as well. And I know John's got some info on our new YouTube channel.
Yeah, we had David Reinhard actually was commenting on last week's podcast with the superintendent
Jim
of liquor
Canepa?
control, Jim Canepa. Thank you, Dino, for this wonderful episode. This is a must-listen-to episode if you're an avid bourbon drinker in the Columbus area, although you don't have to be necessarily from Columbus. So excited for the months to come for bourbon hunting.
Yeah.
So thanks, David.
Yeah, Mr. Canepa gave us hope for bourbons to come to the state of Ohio. Rick Andreessen watched the same one on the YouTube channel. I just watched your podcast on the YouTube channel with the Superintendent of Liquor. That was a lot of O's, awesome.
It was.
I learned a few things I never knew. If you ever hear of a festival coming to the Columbus area, let me know. Again, to you and your whiskey business team, great job. I'm a huge fan. Continued success. That comes from Rick Andreessen. So thank you, Ricky. We appreciate that so much. And
by the way, the 1970s also included the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I Spit on Your Grave.
Halloween came out in the 70s too.
And Halloween.
Yeah, I did not want to see that movie.
The Shape of Things to Come.
I did not want to see that movie.
The 80s were the era of slasher movies.
Wasn't I Spit in Your Grave Roger Ebert's favorite film of all time? I'm being sarcastic.
Of all time.
He thinks it's the worst
He
film.
thinks it was the worst film. You're right. Absolutely. God rest his soul. Yes.
Yeah. Halloween, my friends tricked me into going to see that one. We were going to the multiplex, and I thought we were going to go see something, and, and they took me into Halloween. Cause I don't know why that movie creeped me out like it did at the time, but it did. But, yeah, I never forgave them for that. So, Mr. Feran, Tim Feran, writer for the Columbus Dispatch, a great conversation.
Always a pleasure
and
hanging with you, man.
And
whether
so many
on or off camera. And
so many things.
We didn't cover
that we could have gotten into.
Yes.
That maybe.
And I'm sorry we didn't, but boy, yes. Takeaway is could be greatest decade. Ever.
Arguably, but I think yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could come up with this many films that I love and appreciate from any other decade other than the 70s. There's other films from the 80s and the 90s
and 90s
and the 60s and the 90s and the 60s and the 50s
Pretty in Pink. Come on, guys.
and the 40s and so forth and
but
so on.
we're talking about seminal things that now have echoes in both film and in peak TV.
Absolutely.
Tough to beat.
It definitely resonate.
Yeah.
Tim Feran has been our guest bottle. Pikesville. Oh, by the way,
a really good.
It fits
Very
into the
good
into our favorite little profile, which is $50 or under. It retails for about $50.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you can find it, I don't know if it's available in Ohio. I picked that up in Tennessee. So if it's available here in Ohio. Yeah, state dropper. Whiskey Business, let me wrap things up, is a Never the Luck production hosted by me, your host, Dino Tripodis, and produced by Greg Hansberry. Our producer on the YouTube channel, John Whitney. All the opinions are those of me, your host, and my sometimes and not sometimes reluctant guests, Tim Feran.
Not reluctant
at all.
Come on.
Are never meant to offend, only to inform, educate,
Amen.
And at the end of the day, entertain. And so, my friends, until the next bottle, see ya.
We're all gassed.